people treat oxalate a little like an allergy. And so they think, well, if I'm avoiding it, I shouldn't have any problem. But that whole phenomena of when it went in, I may be in very different health status when it's going out, is going to be one of the things that we have to deal with. And the other is that oxalate is doing multiple things, which may be setting us up for what looks like allergy. Because oxalate drives the inflammasome, because it sets off some of the inflammation pathways, it tends to get the immune system involved. Why? Well, the immune system's job is inflammation and injury, right? So if I'm starting to have inflammatory things that are being kicked off by oxalate, my immune system is going to be, I have to pay attention to that, right? Over time, what it appears to be doing, and there's different mast cell folks who kind of agree with me on this. And again, the research isn't a straight line, but I think it's starting to develop where what we're doing is irritating those mast cells. We're revving them up with this substance, both between the inflammation and maybe even what it's doing to mast cells directly. Because if we can kick off the inflammasome, a mast cell has an inflammasome too. So there's things that can be happening. And what I see in clients is that once they start to move oxalate out, sometimes the immune system can get annoyed enough that you do start to have symptoms that look like immune system symptoms. So you can get rashes. My daughter had rashes. You can get asthma. My son got asthma. You can have these things. And there's actually some really interesting information on certain cell transporters to show why it might be certain systems in the body that get this. So there's certain cell transporters, the SLC26A family of cell transporters. I have memorized that because otherwise it looks like alphabet soup to me. But that family of cell transporters can be expressed in different parts of the body. And depending upon, which variations you might have on the genetics behind these cell transporters, you might be moving oxalate mostly in the lungs. You might be moving oxalate out through the skin. You might be so there's lots of places where these transporters make a difference. But the interesting thing was, even though both of my kids expressed it differently, they looked a bit like they were having an allergic reaction, right? My daughter looked like she had hives potentially. My son, wheezing. So what can be a challenge here is that you might temporarily have to manage histamine sources in your diet or triggers to the immune system, because oxalates kind of set you up to be overreactive. And that's where you can get this oxalate histamine connection. So I have an awful lot of clients who end up having to be on a low histamine diet, not necessarily forever, but in some cases they need it because we need to reduce some of the pressure on their immune system so that when they're moving oxalate out, they're not ending up with more intense symptoms because of the immune system component and mast cells releasing histamine because oxalate got them kind of wound up, and then they release their contents and make problems for us, right?
Wow.
So there's this really interesting kind of issue where some of my clients have been doing a low histamine diet for years and then it stops working. And it turns out when they talk to me, I look at their diet and they've got a lot of high oxalate foods in their diet. And then, they'll say to me, well, I've eaten those all my life. It's like, yes. But the problem is you've gotten to the point where you've hit a critical threshold and your body's going, I'm not having fun anymore.
Yeah.
And, maybe oxalate was under the surface of your histamine problem all along. And I can get the opposite thing going on. Somebody's come to me because they're pretty clear about the oxalate component. And then they start doing work and lowering oxalate. And then they get a big mobilization of oxalate from someplace where it's stored, right? Again, we've got these cell transporters all over the body. We don't know enough about where it might be coming from, but it tends to leave the body in these waves. So you're not necessarily having it leave in a steady stream. So all of a sudden a wave leaves and they're saying, I'm doing everything right and I've got all these problems. It's like, oh, you're going to have to take your histamine down because they've developed a rash, or they're blowing their nose all the time, or they're wheezing. And so this is an area where I can't say for sure one causes the other or whatever, but there looks to be, a kind of overlap here where one of these things may actually be both of these things. And, nowadays, if somebody wanted to go on just a low histamine diet and they were talking to me, I'd say, on principle, take those high oxalate foods out of your diet because I don't see any benefit here. We're just putting your body under more pressure if you've got high oxalate food and you're trying to do a low histamine diet. The likelihood that they may have both, I just figure it's not worth kind of gambling there.